Welcome to These Kids Can't Wait, discovering the world of rare disease.
Today on These Kids Can't Wait, we're honored to welcome Mathias Schmidt, a leader in the fight against rare disease. Dr. Mathias Schmidt is the president and CEO of Armagen and currently serves as executive fellow and executive advisor to the chairman of JCR Pharmaceuticals, where he supports innovation in rare disease therapies, including treatments for lysosomal storage disorders. With more than 2 decades of leadership in global biotech and pharmaceutical development, Mathias has held executive roles at leading organizations focused on neurology, gene therapy, and drug delivery. At JCR, Mathias is helping lead the development of cutting-edge treatments for conditions once thought untreatable, including promising work for beta-manocytosis and other ultra-rare disorders. His global perspective, scientific insight, and deep commitment to patients drive every project forward.
Mathias, thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to have you here. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and what first drew you to the world of biotech and rare disease.
Yeah, Erin, thanks. First of all, thanks so much for inviting me. I feel privileged and humbled to be here, to be invited to this podcast. So, yeah, my name is Mathias Schmidt, and as some of you might hear from my accent, I was not born and raised in the United States. I do live in San Diego. I was born and raised in Germany, living in San Diego and working for a rare disease Japanese company. That's a little bit something unique. I think the only unique thing that I want to say about myself, I feel like I was always in my life at the right time, at the right place when opportunities came. And I also feel very privileged that I grew up in a country that invested me in me very early on. They gave me an education basically for free, up to my doctorate degree, that allows me to do something that is, to be honest, that's not rocket science. It's harder. Rocket science is mathematics and logistics, but understanding a single diseased cell and trying to make a better tomorrow, trying to help fulfill some of the hopes and dreams for the patients we try to serve, is a big aspiration. And I'm most grateful that the government and the society invested in me, giving me an education for free, asking for a little bit of a return of investment. And I feel like this return of investment is not in the form of currency, of money, but in the form of, Mathias, do something great with your education that you received from us. And then I finally ended up in this rare disease field where I feel like, this is where I found my purpose in life. I started very early on studying biotechnology. In my first years at university, I felt like, oh my goodness, where have I landed? Because many things were just so boring, uninteresting to me, until there was a person, he gave seminars in oncology, chemotherapy, new treatments in oncology. And that paved my way. I started out my career in oncology. I worked at cancer hospitals for many years. And this is where I learned that, sometimes doing a little bit can really change the way people see their disease, how they live with their disease. And then miraculously, by always being at the right time, at the right place, I finally ended up in the rare disease space, which is also kind of a long story, but I don't want to bore the audience with long stories.
Actually, we would love to learn more about what led you specifically to JCR Pharmaceuticals and what inspired that connection.
So I moved to the United States in 2012 for a professional opportunity. It was kind of semi-voluntary. The company I was working for got acquired by JCR Pharmaceuticals, and they made me an offer to come over to San Diego to develop biologics to IND, and that's an opportunity I didn't want to miss. And JCR also was investing in smaller companies. And one of their companies they invested in was a company called Armagen. And Armagen was founded by the pioneer in the blood-brain barrier And I was very fascinated about what they were doing. And I was also very fascinated about the disease space they're working in, lysosomal storage diseases. And I was always, asking, how is the company doing? How are they doing? This is so exciting. This is so wonderful, until the head of Takeda Ventures one day came to me and said, Matthias, we need to make a change at this company. Are you willing to step in? And it was almost overnight where I had to make a decision. And it took me actually only one night to make a decision to say, yes, I'm ready to make a big step to lead this rare disease company. They were struggling financially. They were struggling for directions. This is how I got into Armagen. And Armagen was actually the first company who achieved a clinical proof of concept that you can actually bring enzyme replacement therapies into the brain, which is, the brain is the last white spot in the organ landscape that cannot be addressed by biologics, including enzyme replacement therapies, which are so important for rare diseases. And then in 2020, just to finish up how I got into JCR, in 2020, there was a merger opportunity where JCR, who had a very similar technology, was very interested in acquiring Armagen. So we accomplished the merger right at the beginning of the pandemic, and everything was shutting down. And the chairman of the company, he kindly offered me whether I wanted to stay. And in the beginning, I was a little bit reluctant, but finally they convinced me, and it's certainly a decision that I did not regret.
Were the technologies between the two companies similar for blood-brain barrier treatment?
Yes, actually, they were very, very similar. It was, exploiting a receptor on the blood-brain barrier and trying to develop antibodies against this receptor, and then fusing the enzyme to the antibody in order to help it cross the blood-brain barrier. And while Armagen was focusing on the so-called insulin receptor, JCR was focusing on a slightly different receptor, the transferrin receptor. But Armagen had a very, very strong patent portfolio in the space, while JCR had a very advanced manufacturing technology. And this is why this merger actually made a lot of sense.
So I was just curious, what diseases, when they first merged, were you researching and working on specifically?
Yeah. So at the time of the merger, let's call it flagship program of JCR was a program in mucopolysaccharidosis type 1, or MPS 1, or Hurler's disease. And it was Armagen who was actually the first company who demonstrated that you can have actually a clinical benefit if you develop an enzyme replacement therapy that is actually able to cross the blood-brain barrier. And JCR at that time, the flagship program was a program in MPS 2. And they had finished phase 1, 2, and 3 studies in Japan, in Brazil, and then again in Japan. And they had submitted this program for regulatory approval. And to cut the story short, 1 year later, actually the first enzyme replacement therapy that is able to cross the blood-brain barrier was then approved by the Japanese regulatory authority called the PMDA.
So I love it that you're telling us that you've had just these moments in your life that you've been in the right place at the right time. And I was hoping, you could give us an example or a couple of examples that stand out to you of that.
Yeah. Thanks for your thoughtful question, Laurel. So there's a couple of events that come into my mind. Very early on in my career, I told you I was working at cancer hospitals, and I was working in research, and we had a program that was almost ready to for the clinic. And I remember two instances One was a 26-year-old woman with breast cancer that she was denied treatment at other hospitals because they said, we cannot treat you. And I was having a conversation with her, and I was having a conversation about the experimental therapy that we were working on. And she said, she was asking, so when is it ready? Can I try it? And at that time, we were not ready yet. It was really like a heartbreaking moment for me to tell her the truth. We're not ready yet. And to see the despair and the disappointment in her face. And then I remember the first patient that we treated with this experimental therapy. And in the beginning, we had no idea what toxic it or what the safety was. Was it toxic? So we applied it locally to her skin metastases of a breast cancer. And I remember the day that she was dismissed from hospital, and she wanted to show me again, open up her shirt. Thanks goodness she didn't. To show her how the skin metastases have gone away. They almost like they melted like butter in the sun, seriously. And she was completely aware that it did not treat her underlying disease. But every day she looked into the mirror, she was not confronted with the disease anymore. And she told me how much this made a change in her life. And before that, I naively thought that, everything but talking about the cure in cancer is like cheating to ourselves. And I woke up to a new reality. I say, look, if we give more life to the years that people can live, it doesn't have to be the cure. It can be a minor step. It can be a baby step into the right direction, and we make the world a better place for those people affected with the disease. And it kind of shaped my way, how I saw diseases and what is really aspirational. It's not always the cure that makes the only difference. It's a better tomorrow that can make a difference. Another example was a mother with a newly diagnosed son with Batten's type 1, CLN1. I met her at a conference in London. She was asking me, where is Armagen with this program? And I said, look, it's highly experimental. We only have a batch made in the lab, and we hardly have any safety data. She was asking, would you make it available for compassionate use? And I said, I'm not sure whether we can do this legally, but I promise you, at least I will try. And this couple was so strong, they were able to convince the entire board. They were able to find a doctor in Germany who, under compassionate use legislation in Germany, would be willing to treat the boy. And I always felt like the captain on the plane standing on the runway, and then there's a thunderstorm coming in, and you're waiting for the tower to say, you can take off, you can take off. And I was waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And finally, the last board member said yes. And then there was the merger coming with JCR Pharmaceuticals. And of course, we had to disclose this to the chairman of the company to say, look, we have promised this to the family, but the batch wasn't really GMP manufactured. It hasn't undergone safety testing as it should have been. But we believe we found a way how we can legally do this and safely do this. I think any CEO of this planet would have said there's no way. And the CEO of JCR said, Matthias, I think you're doing the right thing. You should go ahead. And we're carrying this risk with you. And so we treated this boy for many, many years. And I think we gave a lot of life back to the years of this little boy. And hadn't there been this moment at this conference where I just met this mother who was so desperate, none of this would have happened. And I think the story, it was presented at a bigger conference. I think it was very inspirational to many, many others. Unfortunately, the boy died of the flu a few weeks later after the the results actually were presented at this conference. But it was probably the strongest testament for me being at the right time, at the right place. And the third event, I'm not saying this because, Laurel, you're in this podcast, but it was in February 2023 at this conference when you just by occasion, but just by chance, were drawn into the room where we were meeting, with a company that is supporting rare diseases, ultra rare diseases, and we met with a president of another rare disease foundation, Carolyn Pacey-Du, and she brought you with her in the room. And I saw you, and you had this button of your son, Oliver. We stepped into a conversation about beta monocytosis, a disease that until then I've never heard of myself. And it basically sparked an initiative where we asked, the head of research at JCR, can we somehow support it? Can we try to make an experimental medicine with some of the resources that we can do? And the answer was yes. And it was basically, I would say, this was the birthday of the Lost Enzyme Project. And with all the many, many things that you all have done and have accomplished until now, we don't know how this is going to end, where it's going to end. But I think it's another testament that, for me, having been at the right time, at the right place, is something that I feel very, very blessed about. And the only thing that in life makes me a little bit furious is when I see people who have so many talents and they're so many times at the right time, at the right place, but they let these opportunities pass because they find excuses not to do it. I have another job, I have to take care of this and that, and I have different priorities. And later in life, they complain about opportunities not having exposed to them. What I want to tell those people is, when it's raining beer, you have to hold out a mug. And that's one of my mantras in life.
That's a great mantra.
Yeah, that is a great mantra. Thank you so much, Matthias. I remember meeting you, and actually the mother that you were speaking of, I met her as well because she was there, and her son had just passed weeks prior. And this was the button that I was wearing.
Oh, yes.
That was the button. I wanted to tell you, I appreciate so much that you see people first. You see the person first. It is a person with a rare disease. And because you see that, it's transformative because you care about the quality of the life. It's like you said, it's not just finding the cure. A cure would be wonderful. But when you can see the person first, you can see what it means to live and to live with quality and dignity and have hope and be able to enjoy your life and what that means. And I think it just makes all the difference. I remember meeting you and you had said the same thing to me. You said, I can't promise you anything, but I'm going to do what I can do to help. And it's meant everything. It's meant everything. So thank you.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. I think this is very, very mutual. I have to confess, by working in this disease space, and having interacted with people like you, with families like you, I think I always feel like for whatever I invest in terms of energy, time, I get 10 times more back than I have invested. And over the years being, working in the rare disease space, I want to give, I don't want to sound like the old wise man. I want to just give one quotation from literature, and that is Mark Twain. And Mark Twain, he said, there's two important days in your life. The day you were born and the day you find out why. And what I tell my colleagues at JCR and what I told my colleagues at Armagen, working in the rare disease space is if you allow yourself into it, if you allow yourself to cry some tears together with the parents, with the families, tears of joy, but also tears of sadness. If you allow yourself into this, you will find something totally amazing. You will find a sense of purpose. You will find a way how you can apply all your knowledge and work together as a team to create something that we as individuals would never ever be able to accomplish. And they can find a sense of purpose in their work. I firmly believe that many of us, we're not only working to get the paycheck at the end of the month. Of course, that's important. But, so many of us are trying to work for a greater good. And I totally accept when people say, look, I have a family I want to raise. I have small children. I want to travel the world. If people find another purpose, that's totally fine. That's totally acceptable. And it's very aspirational. I see people that struggle their entire life to find a sense of purpose. And this is where you can find it.
That is very, and you're going to make me cry, so we need to move on.
One thing that I often talk about with my patients is meaning. Finding purpose. But when you have meaning, it's the greatest motivator. It really propels you forward. And just the meaning that you found in your work is incredible, and it's taken you very far.
But I don't really know what to say about this. But look, nobody lives a perfect life. But if I compare myself to the life that you and your families live, I told you so many times, at the end of the day, I can turn off my laptop, my problems stay on the hard drive, and you have to get ready for the night shift, to see how do you get through the night, how you take care of your child, what's coming up tomorrow, to the caregivers show up. It's what we might think is kind of trivial, but it can scramble your entire day. And then in the rare disease space, we see so many people, affected with the disease, and they find meaning in it, creating awareness, telling people about what it is. The choice of genes in our genome, it's not a choice of lifestyle. This is something we are born with. And what I often say is, we all have 23 times 2 chromosomes, and some even have more. And, how do we define as a society, how would we define a life with more worthwhile living because of a different genetic variant? And if we're really serious about, all life has got the same value, how can we not take, serious care about a child that is, affected with a genetic variant? It was not his or her choice in life. It was not the parents' choice in life. It just happens. It's what we call genetics. But it's not on us to judge. And at those family conferences, you still, you see those kids, they're still having joy. They are having happiness in life. And they have talents that nobody else would develop. And I see the patients and the parents, and despite all the sadness, they can party like crazy. They can still have fun in life. And that's what's really important. Such a diagnosis, it's not the end in life. You can still have fun. And I know that some people are, they get isolated because they have a child that has, a very serious disease, and people don't know how to interact with them. And, by you giving an example, just be a normal human being, be approachable, and, cherish life to the fullest extent. To me, life is a gift. And I feel like life is not a gift that our Creator has given us completely for free. I think there was a kind of a sense behind our Creator saying, look, do something with it. Do something awesome with it. Something nice with it. And sometimes a genetic variant limits us, but I've seen so many people affected by the disease and being such an inspiration to many of us, including us researchers. And when I convey all these messages to my colleagues, they absorb it like sponges. And this is the biggest motivation that they can get, seeing that, pipetting a fluid from one tube to another, where, doing highly complex things where, it's easy to lose any connection in life. But they say, look, your next experiment can create a better tomorrow for those ones we are trying to serve. And they're waiting for it. But at the same time, we need to be very cautious not to raise false hopes, because that, I think, is the very last that the community needs, raising false hopes, saying, look, yeah, something is just around the corner. Things can take time. Things can fail. And there's parents out there who have lost a child, but they stay in the community and they say, look, I want to be the last generation of the parents that are faced with the diagnosis where they get a cold call from the geneticist. Your child has this and this and this lysosomal storage disease, and we are very sorry, but there's nothing we can do about it. And they're still fighting. They keep on fighting despite they know, well, nothing can help their child anymore. But they say, look, it can help the children yet to be born. And I also have highest respect of those people.
Thank you for that.
It was just a lot of times at the conferences, there's parents, those parents that you're talking about, and they say, my child was a pioneer. And that's always a big fear of mine, because you never go into this space wanting to be a pioneer. We are in so many ways, but not wanting to, you want that outcome. I think that it's a space that we can all meet in, and we can all push that change together. And it's so nice as parents to be able to have access, to people like you, where we can really work together. And like you said, we're kind of running on hope, and yet we don't necessarily know the outcomes, and it can be an exciting space to be in, and it can be a scary space to be in, but I sure appreciate that there is room for all of us, and really it takes all of us to do it in this rare space. It's got to be researchers and biotech and parents and patients. And
Mathias, for our listeners, will you tell us more about the J-Brain cargo technology?
I know that there might be some listeners who are very familiar with science, and I'm always very amazed how much parents know, how deep they have dived into it. Let me briefly explain, to those ones who are less familiar. We have been talking about antibodies and enzyme replacement therapies and all these items. So I think everybody knows what a lysosomal storage disease is. The lysosome is the most awesome recycle bin in our body. And recycle bins in our body, they need enzymes to chop down the different substrates that are deposited in the lysosome. And let's imagine this is a little enzyme cutting down the substrate in the lysosome. And unfortunately, there's some genetic variant where this enzyme may not look as healthy as this one, but might have a genetic variant where it doesn't really work well. And this is when the substrate builds up and is causing pathology in the body and also in the central nervous system. And almost 25 years ago, there has been a big revolution where people said, can we make those enzymes just as proteins manufactured, sorry for the word, recombinantly? So it's actually, they are mostly made in, believe it or not, but mostly made in Chinese hamster ovary cells. Many, many years ago, there was a Chinese hamster that developed ovarian cancer, and somebody isolated the cells from this ovarian cancer, and somebody found out it's a great way to make recombinant proteins. Can you imagine this? At the right time, at the right place. And they made these enzymes, and magically, these enzymes find their way when they're infused intravenously. They find their way into the cells of the human body and can clear out the substrate. And that was a revolution that happened in the lysosomal storage disease space. Unfortunately, it was not a full revolution because those enzymes, they are too big to get into the CNS, to get into the brain. And this is because we have a blood-brain barrier. And having a blood-brain barrier is something good because we don't want infectious and noxious and toxic substances to get into our brain, because that's really the hard drive of our body. And we don't want anything to happen to the brain. But unfortunately, this blood-brain barrier also prevents this little enzyme, get into the brain and address the nasty disease. And so very often we see that in lysosomal storage diseases with a neuronopathic component, they're doing okay on the body, but they're not doing okay on the brain. Now, this is where Armagen and JCR actually said, can we bring them into the brain? And there are some receptors on the blood-brain barrier that can actually transport large molecules into the brain. This is like insulin, leptin, IGF-1, transferrin. All these growth factors, these hormones, are important for the brain, and they need to get into the brain by a mechanism called receptor-mediated transcytosis. And basically, there are receptors that shuttle the ligand into the brain. And so both Armagen and JCR thought, why can't we make an antibody that would bind to a receptor on the blood-brain barrier and get shuttled into the brain very much like these little ligands? And this antibody wouldn't really do much. It's only the rocket. And here is the satellite. That's the enzyme. So if we can combine the rocket with the enzyme, with the satellite, the enzyme, click. So here we go. We have an antibody that brings it into the brain, and we have the enzyme, show your face, that can clear out the substrate in the lysosome. And this really sounds like science fiction, but our reality is that the first of these therapies has been approved in Japan 5 years ago, and it has been marketed in Japan for 5 years, and it's for a disease called mucopolysaccharidosis type 2, Hunter syndrome. And this technology is currently also in global clinical trials to bring it to patients across the world. But JCR has not stopped at this one disease called MPS II. They have a portfolio of overall 17 lysosomal storage diseases to which this technology is applied. They have 4 programs in the clinic, but JCR is also a company that only has limited resources. So unfortunately we cannot advance all the programs at the same time. And unfortunately, there's also, every company has got a totem pole. Every pharma company has got a totem pole. And the totem pole, and you want to be very, very high up on the totem pole, because these are the programs that you really want to advance. And that's important because companies, they can only sustainably help the patients if they make money, if they make some profit. So the most promising programs are highest up on the totem pole. And then there's programs that are low on the totem pole.
Yeah, I can imagine it must be really hard to balance all of that, trying to decide which programs to push forward and which ones have to wait.
That is very unfortunately, that is a kind of a reality because the company needs to be sustained somehow. But I think the one thing, and I'm not saying any of the companies I've been working for or have been responsible for, no company, there's no perfect company on this planet. But I think what makes JCR different is that there is a sense, a spirit in the company to say, look, we cannot always go for the biggest indications. We need to somehow make a balance. It's a kind of a responsibility to make this innovation available to those ones who would otherwise have absolutely no chance. And some testaments were actually the CLN1 board that we had talked about previously. It was a very, very risky undertaking. It had a positive outcome. But I think in hindsight, it was exactly the right thing that we have done. And then if you look into the portfolio of JCR Pharmaceuticals, there's some diseases that nobody else is working on because they're just way too small in order to make a profit. But we also have found a partner who is partnering with us on those programs, financially supporting these programs. Much of what we're doing would probably not have been possible without the financial support of the other companies. I think I should not say this because the name of the company, because that would be like advertising. I don't want to do this, but I'm very, very respectful and I'm very, very grateful to these companies who are supporting also the ultra rare disease programs. And again, it's this this combination to say, look, we need to find and we need to strike a balance between what we must do and between what we feel like we have an obligation to do, but also the scientific liberty that the research people are given to support things like beta monoacidosis. It's basically on their, I don't want to say on their free time, they get paid for it, but every company has some idling capacity, and then you have to decide, how do you want to use your idling capacity? Do you want to do something really meaningful to it? Or, do you want to do something less meaningful to it? I think this is something that sets JCR a little bit apart from the other companies. The other thing that I want to say is, and this might be a little bit a tough message, I have worked also at very large pharmaceutical companies. And if you go to the website, all those companies, you will find a slogan, we put the patients first. And I've seen companies who are good at putting patients first. And I've seen companies who are only taking this as a slogan in order to catch the attention. And it's okay not to be perfect. But what I often see is when companies play with the slogan, we put the patients first, but they're not serious about it. I think it's more honest and it's better for the patient community not to even say we're putting the patients first. I think there's nothing wrong if you say we are trying to put the patients first, but we're not always perfect. That's a lot more honest. And I think it's also for the patient community, it's a more honest message. And I think you cannot really live up this mantra to saying we always put the patient first, because if you run out of money, well, maybe then we're not also not putting the patients first. So it's a very, very difficult, it's a thin red line that we're trying to walk, and we should never play with the hopes of patients or families. That's something that I'm trying to live up to. And then talking about other technologies at JCR that I'm very, very excited about, and what I've seen in the past, and something that I thought we would never accomplish. Where the scientists at JCR, they said, protein therapy might be a stepping stone to the next really, really, really big thing. Protein therapy will be a lifelong treatment, probably every week or every other week. And they said, can we apply our technology also to gene therapy? And I personally told them, please don't even try. For the last 25 years, we have failed so miserably. We are using the same old adeno-associated viruses that have failed so many times in the clinic, and there have been so many false hopes and promises around gene therapy. Everybody said it's around the corner, and it wasn't, because there is this big liver toxicity that we see, like almost every 3 to 6 months, we see another announcement, a patient died in a clinical trial or on a product that is on the market. And it hasn't really seen the breakthrough that we were hoping to see. But good thing the scientists didn't listen to me. They tried it anyway. And they applied this J-brain cargo technology to gene therapy. And they modified those viruses. They put this antibody tag on the surface of these viruses. And they found certain mutations that would very significantly decrease the tropism to the liver. And these data have been published at a conference about a month ago. And they've shown that basically by bringing the antibody on the surface of the capsid of the virus, they have found a great way to deliver gene therapy into the brain to an extent and to an efficacy that I was not even able to dream about. We have applied this in a disease setting called Batten's disease, where you have seen efficacy that goes way beyond anything that we can ever accomplish with protein therapies. And they have found that they could reduce the tropism to the liver by 98%, which gives us a big hope that this novel form of gene therapy not only gets well into the brain, but is also, when it's given systemically, is much safer. That is something that excites me very much to see what we have achieved in the preclinic. And I can only express my highest respect to the scientists for not being obedient and for having accomplished something that is truly amazing and potentially transformative. It is still, a few years out from clinical testing, but I think it's the next step after protein therapy that we're seeing here to create a better tomorrow for the patients that we are aspiring to serve.
So will it be trialed in Batten's disease first then?
That is a very good question, Lauren. And, I talked about the totem pole. These programs are very low on the totem pole, and we're trying to find ways to somehow finance the programs. And we really have to think out of the box and outside of the company boundaries here. And I don't want to make any false promises on how we are going to proceed. If we are going to proceed, it's still up in the air, but many people in the company are very motivated to move this forward.
Do you think the company would ever consider an ultra-orphan disease like beta mastocytosis if we came in as a partner for fundraising?
If there is sufficient funds, and I'm so sorry to talk about money here, but these diseases are incredibly difficult to treat. They're incredibly rare, and they're incredibly expensive. If we talk about clinical trials, if we say $1 million a patient is not even sufficient for clinical trials. I think if funding is available, JCR would never say no to develop these programs forward. At the same time, I personally, I do believe that there's many people on this planet who are very well off, who say, look, I have earned enough money, and I also want to leave this world a better place. And if my funds and if my wealth can help accomplish a better tomorrow for those patients who otherwise have absolutely no choice, I think those people who are supporting communities like you have a real chance to move programs forward with their help, where they can say, look, I'm leaving this planet a better place than I was born into. And I've, especially here in the United States, I'm so often so impressed about how much philanthropy is out there. And I'm still naive enough to believe that this is possible also in rare diseases and in ultra rare diseases.
Well, we understand nothing's for free. It does take money takes lots of it. And we appreciate it, and we appreciate your the other companies that have stepped in with you, and to fund ultra rare disease, because again, like I said, it is we are a small group, and we can get lost in the shuffle of larger diseases, so we really appreciate that. I also appreciate that your scientists did not listen, because I agree, in science, if everyone listened, nothing would be discovered. So you know that's
So true.
amazing. And then, like I said, we know, like, just even with the news coming out, like you said, for many years, it's like gene therapy, and you hear it, especially when in a research setting. I've heard it for years, and now to finally see real breakthroughs, it's just amazing. We're living through an amazing scientific, I don't know if it's a scientific feat or something, but we're just living through something that you just, like you said, you always hear about it, but it's finally coming to fruition. So it's really exciting.
Lorena, I think you said something very, very important to the patient community. And I don't know how many people are listening here with a desperate situation. There's absolutely no treatment out there. And I never want to raise any false hopes, but Lorena, you just said so nicely. Innovation happens now. As we speak, innovation happens. And, in a year from now, things can happen that we were not even, daring to dream about today. And that's the amazing thing about, the day and age that we're living in right now. There is so much progress going on, certain things that we're not seeing that happen this minute, and they get published a few months, from now, and we, our jaws drop and we see the next new set of data.
Yeah, it's and I love that, because there's publishings and it's everything's so readily available, that one person's discovery then leads to, again, like a think tank of more, moving it forward. And maybe if we just tweak it this way, or we can use it now for this disease or this, this illness, it's just amazing. And it's really amazing to see what JCR is. Like I said, you're moving forward with all of these, technologies, not just, again, yes, profit is important, but also just to help your patients. And that's really inspiring, and really appreciated. So thank you.
So, Matthias, if you could speak directly to the parents anxiously following every clinical trial update, what would you want the parents to know?
First of all, I want to tell the parents, even though you feel totally alone, you feel totally isolated, you're not alone. There's a big community, and we are with you. Second, I want to tell them, we can only imagine what you're going through. It's, you're wishing the best for your child, and then all of a sudden you hear about a diagnosis that limits, what they can achieve in life. And we can only imagine how desperate this feeling. But again, life does not stop, even though life sometimes, or genetic variance limits what we can do in life. Life doesn't stop. Life can still be full of joy and fun, and we can do fun, we can do fun things together. We can cherish the moments. We can cherish the small moments. The next thing I want to say is, I don't want to play with the word hope. It's so difficult. A mother of a rare disease child once told me, Matthias, hope is such a nasty word until we turn hope into action. And there's so many people who turn hope into action, who just don't want to accept this situation. There's a disease and there's nothing available for the treatment of your child. I don't want to raise false hopes to say every parent can make a big difference and can help the development of a new drug, but there have been parents who did not accept the diagnosis, and that led actually to drug approvals and to a big change in the paradigm how we treat those diseases. But please don't put this burden on your shoulders, and don't think you have to do this also for your child. Sometimes it is doable, and sometimes it is just too much. But please be aware, innovation happens this second. And there's things that happen that I personally would not be able to dream about right now. And I hear it in a scientific publication, maybe in 6 months, where I felt like, wow, this is the next breakthrough. And this is always going on. This is always happening. And the other thing I want to tell to the parents, you can make a big, big change. You can make a big, big difference by just giving all the love to your child that you have. Sometimes the children are, they have psychiatric symptoms, they have behavioral symptoms. They're wonderful kids. And the way they sometimes behave is part of their underlying disease. There's nothing that they can do about it. And I have so much respect for all the parents who are so calm and still so supportive and loving of their children. And I think this is what you can do every day to your child. Just love your child. Sorry, there's one other citation. Mother Teresa once said, if you want to change the world, go home and love your family. And at the conferences, I see how much the parents, how they love their children, with how much passion and how much patience they're dealing with their kids. I encourage them, whenever it's possible, attend such a conference to see you're not alone. I encourage them always stretch out your feelers. What's going on in the community? Contact your clinician. Look out, contact the pharma companies. Rattle the cages. Create awareness. Say, do something. Go to the schools and speak to the teachers and say, look, my child has this and this disease. Maybe your class might be interested, your students might be interested learning more about rare diseases. We did this and we had a blast. It was the best day in the year when we did it. We went to an elementary school and told them about rare diseases. We had a wonderful discussion about asking them, what can you do to integrate them in your life? And I learned so many wonderful, wonderful things from the children, how we can integrate them. And this is something that you can do. Small things can have a huge impact. Please don't give up.
Just hearing you speak about that, you're absolutely right. It's not hope that fuels us, and it's not hope that we're really talking about. We're talking about love.
It's about loving our children. It's about giving them all the love that we can. That's the essence of humanity.
That's nice. Yeah. And with community, like I said, Laurel having her community surrounding Oliver, it's been really inspiring to see that too. So like you said, schools and your community are very important. And also, just living life, getting it out there.
I always say love ties it together, and it really does. It's just...
Yeah. I see families that really grow together. With such a diagnosis, unfortunately, I also see families breaking apart based on this diagnosis because one of the family members just cannot stand the burden. Yeah. But love ties it together. I couldn't say it in any better way. Love ties it together. That's what it's about.
Mathias, thank you so much for joining us today and for the incredible work that you're doing to push the boundaries of rare disease research. Your efforts are deeply inspiring, not just for the scientists and clinicians, but for the families like ours who are really holding on to hope and ready to take action. If you've enjoyed today's episode, we'd love for you to subscribe and share it with others. Every download, every share helps bring attention to the urgent needs in the rare disease community. If you'd like to learn more about the work JCR is doing, be sure to check out their website. And if you want to help fund important treatments, like the one JCR is developing for beta-mannosidosis patients, you can visit the lostenzymeproject.org. We've included both those links in the show notes below. We're so grateful that you've joined us on this journey today, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us on These Kids Can't Wait. Every story shared brings us one step closer to awareness, advocacy, and action. If you've been inspired, please subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode.
To learn more about the Lost Enzyme Project or donate to the cause, you can visit our website, Instagram, or Facebook page. Those links will be provided in the show notes below. Thank you again, and remember, these kids can't wait, but together, we can make a difference.